Hello, hello, hello.
Hey, Christina.
Good morning, Karen.
I am just so excited for our first podcast. And the topic that we chose was imposter syndrome. I'm so glad that we can talk about this because this has been an issue personally of mine and a lot of my clients that I work with in the self trust arena. So, thank you so much for being willing to do this as our first episode.
You're welcome. Now, this is such an important topic, something I also work with my clients as well. As a clinical psychologist, I sort of see the consequences of that over the long term, that it can be really harmful, resulting in anxiety and depression, and at its worst, even suicidality. So this was really kind of near and dear to my heart as well. So I really appreciate that you wanted to do this. Imposter syndrome is a term that was used to coin, and there's like sociological and psychological studies on this phenomenon. And it's primarily been focused on really high achievers, like,
Mhm.
people who have PhDs or they're published or they're, CEOs. And even though they're incredibly successful, they still have this pervasive feeling that they didn't earn it. They're going to be found out. They're a fraud. And there's all this anxiety and depression about it. And so it's typically when you go and look up imposter syndrome, that tends to be what kind of you're going to find out there. But you and I talked about this and said, you know what? I don't think it's limited to just people who are high achieving or
A
uh,
personality, not just a personality people.
yeah. As a therapist, I can tell you, I see imposter syndrome, people dealing with that all the time, all the time. And, you and I have known each other for a really long time. This is something you've been dealing with for a long time too, right?
Oh, yes, until my journey of just full journey on this thing. Yep.
So I'm just, what Karen and I are going to be talking about is something a little bit more broader. So, you can call it imposter syndrome. You can call it feeling like a fraud. Some people call it masking. Like, it goes under different names, this same phenomenon. And what it's primarily like marked by, like, so you kind of know that this is theirs. You might have this often a fear of failure, and particularly the sense that if I fail, and why it's so fearful is if I fail, I'm going to be found out. Like, covers are going to be ripped off. They're going to find out I'm a fraud. And so you'll have this fear of failure and either avoid things or even go in the other extreme of workaholism. Well, I'm just going to have to be A plus 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 so that I never get found out. So that's one of the things you might see in your own life. It might be an instinct to mask. It might be where you find yourself kind of looking around and seeing, well, what are other people doing? What do I need to say? How do I dress? What kind of car do I need to drive? What show should I be watching so that I can fit in? And the instinct to mask is so that I don't stand out. It's this desire to not stand out. It looks like I just fit in. People who have this, you will have it like persistent self-doubt, like really uncertain, like, did I deserve this? Was it just luck? Was it because somebody helped me? Oh no, like, I don't think I really earned this. I don't think I can go on like pretending, or sort of a sense of pretending. So this pervasive self-doubt. There's also discounting achievement. You'll see this where even if you have been successful, you don't think you earned it. There's a lot of negative self-talk. There's, for some people, when you're constantly sort of minimizing or doubting your own achievement, it can come across even as like sort of false humility and just be annoying to people. There might be like a lot of comparison to other people, because it's like, well, I'm not doing as well as so and so. So, I didn't really earn that, or I'm not really there yet. And rooted in that is really some unrealistic expectations that usually we have of ourselves, or we see maybe it's something we got from our family. And so we don't know really how to evaluate our own success or our own worth. And so we set it incredibly high and then we can't reach it. And then we feel like, oh, well, then I must be an imposter, right? So, and there's other aspects of it. So I'm a neurodivergent therapist. I am both on the autistic spectrum and have some mild ADHD. And I know in the autistic spectrum community, I have a lot of clients who come in with anxiety because of the masking, because they're trying to fit in. Or I've had friends in the LGBTQ community who were in a really conservative work environment, and so they didn't feel that they could really show up as their authentic self because of the fear, like maybe it wouldn't be accepted. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so, there's just really something that I think if you're a human being, at some time or other, you're gonna have experiences. Like, wouldn't you agree, Karen, that
Yeah, I think that's the whole point of this, right? It's the degree that you have it, right? And I think everybody had this, especially in this society, right?
Mhm.
And the way that we're brought up, because as kids, we start to learn, like education always makes us compare another A, B, C. You know what I mean? I think it creates this setup, right, for us, and I think that's part of it as well, right?
Yeah. Well, that kind of brings us to one of the things that we're going to be talking about in this series, because we're going to have a few videos on this, because we felt that I know that there's, like, if you Google this or if you go to YouTube and look at videos, you'll find a lot of videos out there, and they're pretty short, and they give you a few tips on how to deal with it. And Karen and I wanted to take our experience, Karen as a coach and a leadership development consultant, and me from a clinical background, clinical psychologist background. We really believe that for true sort of to move from coping to truly thriving in your life, we have to get to the root cause. And that part has to do with some understanding, like, why do we experience this, right, Karen? So one of the reasons, and the big reasons we even have this phenomenon, is because we're human beings. And
Mhm. Yeah.
we're not only, one thing about humans is we're social beings. So because of that, we have an instinct to belong. It's for our survival. If we don't belong to a clan, like, we're going to be thrown out of the cave and eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, or killed by another clan. So there is an instinctive drive for safety in belonging that all humans have. And because of that, there is an instinct to be seeking out reassurance. Like, Karen, you'll be familiar, right? Seeking out reassurance that I'm okay. Like, you're not going to throw me out of the cave, right? I'm okay. Like, you're familiar with this one, right?
Yeah, and I think it's even about, when you're in grade school. I don't know how about everybody else, but for me, I remember I've always wanted everybody to like me, right?
Mm.
Because I couldn't distinguish between, this group versus this group versus this group. I wanted everybody to like me, and then when I finally realized with that big lesson, not everybody's gonna like you. It's okay. It just gave me some relief, right? And I think that's the whole point of it. We want to please everybody. And then I became a pleaser in the end, which did not help me. But
Mm.
I think the whole point of this is that it's not just about what do I want to say? It's about like you just said, which takes off so much pressure because you're wired this way.
Yes.
It's like
Yes.
we're also wired to protect ourselves, right? If you think about it, because we're always looking out for the danger for survival reasons, right? And I think that's part of it, is we're wired that way, right? So then when we, like, we're worried something's going to happen, so what do? We find all the evidences related to that one. We notice all the evidence that proves that, oh my gosh, this bad thing's going to happen, but we're not open to the other part, that there's signals of things that are
Yeah.
really good that's going to happen, and we miss it, right? I think that's what I love about my own journey, as well as the journey I put through my other clients, is looking for those things to have a more curiosity, and other things we'll be talking about later on in this episode.
Yeah, I think I love that you highlighted that, because that is a takeaway that I want people to get, because I've had a lot of clients who come in who feel like bad about themselves because, like, they'll self-identify as people pleasing,
Hmm.
and they'll
I think it's
feel,
horrible.
yeah, they think it's some sort of
Like you
character
have to
flaw,
stop it,
right?
right? Like a defect. It's a
Yeah,
defect.
there's
I
a
know
lot
exactly. And then you're like, oh, I have to stop this, and you just can't,
of,
because
yeah. And there's like shame, feeling bad. But the thing is, what
shame's a
comes
big
up
one. Yep.
is there is hardwiring in us as social beings that we need to be in community to be safe. And so some of us are more wired and more sensitive to that. And those are going to be the folks who are more like scanning the environment, what I need to do to fit in, and seeking that external validation, because our brain is always looking for like danger. How are we going to, what's the threat to us? And if we can understand that this is a thing, we're not living in a cave anymore, and we're not going to be thrown out to be eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, but there's a part of that hardwiring is still there. And the more that we can understand, so that it is something you almost feel more in your body, and it's not even a thought, it's like a feeling of tension and discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
The more that we can understand that and recognize it, then the more we can bring our new brain online, and we can actually start building the wiring and the meaning and the depths of understanding, where we aren't sort of hijacked by these primitive fears, and we can come from our more sort of authentic self. So that's really a lot of what we're going to be focusing on as we kind of move on this journey.
And when you talk about the new brain, so let's just be distinct about what a new brain is, because I didn't really quite understand you the first time when you and I talked about and you used the term new brain, because that's what you're talking about, the thriving brain, right? So instead of just coping, you're able to make conscious decisions about it, or about your decision or your next action. That's what the new brain does versus the coping brain or survival brain, or the, I forgot the term you used, but the whole point is that's what we used to do for the danger part. So just want to clear that about that new brain. So
Yeah, I guess I wasn't going to do this, but I guess I'll do it again real quick, right? So our brain, like, people think, oh, we're so, we've evolved and we're so sophisticated. We can fly in airplanes and we can go to the
exactly.
moon and all of that, right? We can create
Yeah.
great works of art and music. But the thing is, the brain, the structure of the brain, so that's all those things are technology, art, music,
The
great
creative side.
poetry. Yeah, all of that. That's what when we talk about our new brain, the meaning maker, that's our new brain. But we still have our lizard brain that is primarily designed for threat assessing, making sure we stay alive, making sure we eat, and making sure we have, like, basically we procreate. So, I mean, it's very basic. And a lot of people don't realize that how how prominent that part of our brain is in our day-to-day lives and how it interacts with our new brain. And so, I'll bring that in here and there,
Hmm.
because I do think it's helpful to start understanding the more we have the operating manual. It's almost like the brain is a Ferrari and you've never driven a car like that. And
Mm.
all you've ever used is like a bicycle. Like, you're going to have to learn how to drive that Ferrari, because it's very different from a bicycle. So I'll be sprinkling some of that in, throughout this. And I know when Karen and I talked about doing imposter syndrome as our first, we're like, oh my God, if we're really going to do this justice, we can't do this in one episode, right?
Yes. Especially because it was a journey to go through this whole imposter syndrome and put it to a place where I could make decisions with my thriving brain instead of my coping brain. It
Yeah.
took a journey. And so that's why a journey cannot be explained in just one episode. So,
So we're going to start today,
mhm.
with, so basically when we decided we wanted to do this, one of the things I did was I went and, you know, went onto YouTube and watched a whole bunch of content out there on imposter syndrome, because Karen and I wanted to bring some added value. If you've already seen those videos, what I noticed that was common was, they all give you the definition or explanation of what imposter syndrome is, and then they often give you 3 to 5 tips on how to alleviate some of the distress. But
Mm,
what I
yeah.
noticed was they were all very, one, they were very short term. It was like getting out of the discomfort in the immediate present. And a number are external, very external, sort of validation focused. And Karen and you and I talked about this. And you said, "Oh, I've done some of those things."
Yeah. So let me just say, so it's interesting for me with it. I mean, you see it all the time in posture syndrome because it's just a popular topic, right? And you get a lot of views and all that. And I think the thing for me, it's easy because I personally wanted some quick fixes to it, right? Because I knew I had imposter syndrome, and I would click and I would try it. And it's very interesting because some would work and some wouldn't, right? It just depends on who you are. And also, I believe it also depends on your own mental ability to withstand. I believe that it would work, right? And so it's interesting because I think some of them will work, but they're not for the long term. I just realized it would work for like the first time or second time because like it's so in awe, right? But then I realized how much my internal critic would say, "Oh, you were just lucky that it worked," right? Because my almost my imposter syndrome was fighting against the fact that no, it's not going to work, because it liked me in, and so it's just interesting. And I was realizing that's the whole point of what we're trying to discuss here. It's not about always, because the coping will work, but it's more of a deeper journey, right? That's more important, right? So we're not saying that it's like it will work, but not for the long term, right? Because it comes down to those root symptoms of realizing what you said earlier about, you know, the essence of trying to belong, but giving you a different perspective on what does it mean to belong, right? And not to the driver that I originally was thinking about it. So
Yeah, like for example, I actually heard someone who does research on this just talk about their own struggle with um, imposter, and it was really more the classic imposter syndrome, high achieving, and sort of having that self doubt, like, do I really belong here? And so one of his strategies was to Google himself every morning, and then he could see
wow.
all the different, publications that he did, and challenge that inner critic by having this external evidence. And it's called a cognitive behavioral technique. But what struck me, I was like, well, if that actually really worked to heal this, you wouldn't have to keep doing it every day.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Another thing, a version that I saw, and again, um, that had this external validation. Well, what I mean by external validation is that it's, again, remember, we're social beings and it's about staying in the cave. So we're looking outside ourselves. And so this person's tip was, every time you get a good review at work, or your best friend sends you a card telling you what a great best friend you are, whatever these little external pieces of evidence are, put it in a file. And then whenever you're feeling that doubt, pull out your hype file, pull out the file, and then go through and read, and challenge. Again, a cognitive behavioral challenge. And I was like, okay, but again, like, well, if that really worked in the long run, you wouldn't need the file, you
Yeah,
know?
I even think a lot about when we talk about the things like when I remember I used to remember say, "You are beautiful,"
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and I would like, and then my inner critic says, "But you're not." Like it was like the funniest thing. It's like I tried so hard to make it work, but that's what I'm saying. It just didn't work for me. Like some of them will work for a short period of time until it's again my inner critic says, "No, you're not." Or like when after I got the affirmation, I'm like, "Oh, they're just being nice to me,"
Yeah.
Or like we said earlier, my other part of imposter syndrome would say, "I got the award because this other guy, like I did this in MBA school, right? I went to Sloan, MIT, and we had this strategy workshop, and I was like trying to, and I remember we won the strategy for Toys R Us and Children's World, and I did Child's World. He did Toys R Us, and we won the award. Like $3,000 or something. I forgot the amount. It was a Booz Allen, I think. But the whole or Boston Consulting doesn't matter. The whole point of it is interesting because I remember for the longest time getting so embarrassed and always giving him the credit of the award. When I got the award and described it to my husband, I gave the person who was my partner. I was just lucky I had a great partner, as though I didn't do nothing, right? And I think that's part of it. You know, it's that validation of other people, but then not believing it either. And so
Yeah,
it's never good enough.
that's
It's
like,
never good enough. It's
yeah.
never good enough.
Yeah, so we're calling this the external validation trap. And you can hear in Karen's story that on the one hand, there's that, the external validation that says, okay, yeah, you won this, you're good. And then immediately, that judge comes in and says, you're probably still in danger. It was probably really heavy, right? Right. Oh my
Someone's
God,
gonna
then they're
think
going to
you can
find
do
out.
it, and you're gonna screw up on your strategy all by yourself.
Right.
You can't do it.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's matter of fact, this reminds me, Karen, like you and I, when we were, so Karen and I worked together many years ago. She was my boss, and we were doing, remember we used to go to we would go to a cafe, and we were working through this really wonderful book I can highly recommend, and it's called Soul Without Shame by
Yes.
Byron Brown.
Beautiful. I love that one. Yeah,
Yeah,
that was my first one I think I got from you to
I
explore
think,
this.
yeah, so anyone working on imposter syndrome, I
And
highly
shame,
recommend
especially.
you
Yeah.
get this book, because
That and
this
Brene Brown, both of them. Yep.
Brene
But keep
Brown's
going.
work on shame
Uh-huh.
and Byron Brown's work on the inner critic. Because
Mm-hmm.
one of the things he talked about, which is what you just brought up, was that, and this has been sort of my issue with cognitive behavioral challenging strategies, is he comes from a mindfulness base, so a little bit Buddhist psychology, that what you're trying to is real freedom comes from disengaging from the judge altogether, disengaging. So when you resist, you're engaging. So if you try to say, "Oh, see, like I have this file, or I can Google myself and see," and I'm doing cognitive challenge. I'm challenging the voice inside me that says I'm not good enough, and I try to
Yep.
challenge it, that it engages the critic, and the critic will always have a counter argument. And that's why I think it doesn't work. I think that's why you have to keep doing it
I
over and
totally
over
agree.
again,
Yeah.
because you're engaged now. When I'm in my office, I don't know how many of you remember this. I don't have it here, but it's called a Chinese handcuff. And it's this little tube of
Yeah,
bamboo.
I
And
remember that. And then you
yeah, yeah,
try to
yeah.
pull it
And
up
when
and you're
you,
pulling both sides.
yep, and
It never works.
it doesn't work. It just it keeps you more and more trapped. The more resistance and more trapped you are. And so the really the goal to get a Chinese handcuff is you have to relax into it. And so we this first episode we're going to be focusing on what we're calling the external validation trap, and which I think we just explained that part to you, but the rest of what we're going to be focusing now is, you know, this episode is going to be the first of, I think, four, 3 or 4 different approaches that is really more working at that root cause on
Yes.
how to really move from coping to thriving. And the first topic we wanted to talk about was cultivating authentic self confidence. So do you want to start us off on this, Karen?
Yeah, I think also what's interesting for me was what's really important about this confidence is it's not just about the achievements, right? It's really trying to get to the essence about who you really are. And we intermingled this. You and I are talking about this about self trust because I'm doing this. My company is called Self Trust because I believe that that's the root of it is that essence part where you start to believe yourself no matter what. And this is where again, it's more than what you accomplish, more than what you do, what school you went to, or, it comes down to the root of who you truly are and your unique values and da da da. And a lot of it is from inside. It's really a journey. And I think that's what you and I are talking about. It's a journey, right? And, you know, it's not like what Christina and I said earlier on this is we got have to understand like I dealt with imposter syndrome for like, long times. I'm 59, so let me admit I'm almost 60. And I've been dealing with this for a long, long time since when I was growing up, right? The imposter syndrome, simulating all these other things for wanting to belong. I think it's really important to understand that it is a journey of uncovering and understanding. And sometimes what we're hoping is that we will make it go faster for you because the lessons that we learn and then, Christina's experience, we just found this amazing connection for Christine and I to share with you.
Yeah, so this first sort of component, let's call it a component, on the journey, our first leg of the journey, that both Karen and I have really been. I know for me, I think I'm a therapist now, but this is like my fourth career. I didn't start off seeking this. I think it was the inspiration from working with just the most amazing therapist I was so lucky to find. And, it's been like a 28-year journey. And the focus has been really on figuring out who I was And Karen and I both believe that to overcome imposter syndrome, part of what's going on is when there's this feeling of if I get discovered, I'm going to be thrown out of the cave. So it's often either I have some sense that I'm broken, I'm not okay. It's just there's some insecurity. It's like I'm not enough. I'm not enough, right? And so doing part of to really truly overcome imposter syndrome, there is this journey to discover you're already enough. You were born already enough. And how do you know, get to the point where you truly feel this? And you're not going to get there after watching one video. We're here to sort of outline the map and really encourage you to find the help and the support that you need to go on this journey. But we can tell you that the first part is starting to say, who am I? To do this self exploration and to increase your sense of self awareness, which can feel really scary. That can sometimes be the first thing that gets in the way. It's like, oh, I don't want to look because, then I'll confirm my worst fear that I'm not enough. And
Yeah.
I can already tell you, that's just you were born already okay. And I think
Yeah.
that's a
And I
big
think,
part of
yeah. And I
caring.
think the thing is interesting for me is the fact that one thing I remember is my first journey was what was my purpose? And that became a big issue for me because I was so trying to find what is my purpose? And that's not really, that's
Mm,
different to me now than who am I?
yeah.
Because you have to understand who you are and accept part of it is that exploration and self-awareness. It's also being able to understand your past and accepting the gifts of your past. And
Mhm.
that's what I'm trying to do with a lot of my clients is, the things that's stopping us from the self-awareness also is our past. We can't stand in the present moment. And I was always regretting. I mean, that's why, with the 10 step, no, 12-step program, right? It's all about, understanding, right? And letting go, right? And to me, that's the big thing that I've done with my clients that makes a difference where you can start to accept your past, right? And accept it for making who you are, like every part of you, you're perfectly imperfect. And I know people like to say that, but I've used this with you before. And that acceptance of myself being perfect, because no one's perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect, maybe God, because I believe in the Lord. But I'm just saying that that's what I think is the beauties of you, because that's what makes you you, right? And I think one of the key things I've learned about that in the past is when you look at your past, and I don't know if I want to share this one activity, if that's okay with you, Christina.
Mhm.
But in the past, I've done is, and I do actual coaching on this too. So let me just tell you the quick thing is you create a life timeline and you would create it into 5 various different segments of your life. So maybe, when you were, when you were a young kid to when you were in high school to when you're in college to early childhood, I mean, to early adulthood to, where you are now, right? And the whole point of this for every major event, good or bad, right? You put both the good things and those things that plague you, and you write down what are the gifts of that,
Mm.
right? What are the gifts? Because as you start to practice that exercise, it allows you to start to accept it and realize, okay, I'm still standing and it isn't horrible, right? Because something came out of it. At the moment it might have been, but even in that moment, the trick is to think about what are the gifts that could happen that could be realized later on. And that's started to help me change my relationship with my past, which is part of that self-awareness too.
What we'll do is we're going to put the instructions on how to do that exercise, like down in the about section on this. So click that, and we'll have so exercise because we want to give you actually practices as opposed to sort of
Talk only.
well, or like kind of quick fix
Yes.
tips. Like we this is long-term work to do this healing work. And so we're going to be providing you with, some of what these exercises are. And again, I would recommend that you seek out a therapist or seek out a life coach.
Ouch.
Or if you're or a pastoral counselor, like somebody who is trained to help you go on this journey. I mean, there's some self like so there's a lot of self help books out there, but again, I do think that part of the work of healing imposter syndrome is understanding like there's this aspect of shame around it, right? So to do it by yourself, you can be a little bit like you're okay, I'm going to do this, but then if it doesn't work, like no one will know. No one has to see those parts of myself that I'm not certain of. And
Hmm.
there's something incredibly courageous when you do this work, with the support of a guide, because you're being like open and honest and practicing. And why that's so important is because one of the big fears again of imposter syndrome is the people in the cave, my fellow cave people are going to see that I'm not accurate and kick me out of the cave. So by working with somebody, you're able to experience that vulnerability, and this is why Brene Brown's work is so important. You can experience it and find out you're going to be okay. You're going to survive, right? So this is what I call embracing existential courage. That it takes this courage to confront your own self-doubt and your own fears. And I love words, right? I can't remember if I told you this, but I love the word courage, right? It comes
Hmm.
from the Latin word for heart. To have heart. It's to have, you can't experience courage without fear, because courage is to have heart in the face of fear and to be able to take action in the face of fear. So if you're going to be able to develop this existential courage, which is the courage to be your authentic self, like you gotta step into the fear and the anxiety about not everybody's, a really good friend of mine told me, he's like, Christina, you're not everybody's cup of tea. And I love that. I mean, yeah, and even not everybody is from your tribe.
Yeah, that's
I
true
think
too.
Sharon and I,
You
part
don't.
of
The
our
tribe.
journey,
You're right. The tribe is not good because that way it could. Yeah, you could.
it's okay to understand not everybody's from your tribe, and that's okay.
Hmm.
And starting to learn how to soothe yourself and how to recognize that fear and to find your courage is what I love about the work, is helping clients find their courage. And then also finding like what's meaningful to you, like why, when we're really dependent on external validation, we tend to be looking what's meaningful to other people,
Hmm.
right? And then how do I adapt that and how do I fit in? But meanwhile, we've actually abandoned ourselves.
Yep.
And so when the abandoned self knows they're on their own, that again, that even more that fear and anxiety and that spiral into the external validation trap. So finding what is meaningful to you, your personal meaning. I think Karen, that was a big catalyst for you, right?
Yeah. And I think the whole point of it too is that when you're trying to have the courage, when you get that fear, it also is again. Remember what you said earlier about the coping brain or the surviving brain or the whatever brain we're talking about, the lizard brain, because it's trying to get you out from danger, and it's always going to say, "Wow, wow, wow, danger, danger, stop, stop." That's your fear, and it's always going to be exaggerated. And I think that's the point where I started to recognize that, and that helped me a lot, that the threat isn't as threatful if I could just take the moment to just let it pass by and be and just notice it as an alert that it might be dangerous, but not go into this big thing that it's like gonna. So this is sort of what I had to learn too, right?
Yeah. And I think when we're in that lizard brain,
Hmm.
so that's the old brain.
Hmm.
And then to actually do this work to transcend and to really heal, it really is starting to learn to recognize when we're in that lizard brain, and then how do we shift that to our new brain? And the new brain is where we have things like personal meaning. And I just remember having conversations with you, Karen, where, for you, your faith, right? That was a big part for you in finding that meaning and having that sort of guide you out of fear. Like, can you speak to that a little bit?
I think because I'm a Christian, and the work that I've done with my relationship with the Lord is really trying to like trust in Him more and more, and then knowing the fact that He didn't want harm to come of me. And I think of the universe too. I talk about the universe and Christ is believing that we are. It's not about like everybody's trying to get us, right? Like God helps me realize that. good things will come, right? And I think that's the whole point of it allows me to be more courageous, to believe in the fact that God is watching my steps, like things will unfold. It's also with the phrase, even, when a door closes, another door opens, the timing of that. It's so true. I've seen that in my life when I could see it. And I think that's the whole point of it. It's allowing your eyes to see something different. And I know I'm going to go off in a path, but I got to tell you something that I really think is important is to realize this is, you know, there's the whole point of we talk about the Johari windows, what you don't see, what you don't know. And that's why for me it's really important to get that. Sometimes you need that courage and you need that external support to help you with that, right?
Mhm.
And sometimes even tell my client, what would you say to a friend if they were you? Really hard for them to do initially until we practice that, right? But it gives you another perspective. And we're always nicer to friends and tell our friends to be courageous than we are to tell ourselves, right? Because we're caught in that, the grip of the fear. And I think that for me is sort of why my faith, it just allows me to just have something to know that I'm not alone. And
Mm.
that's what helps me. I think people who believe in the universe is the same thing, where you don't feel alone, that things will work out, right? And there's times when you say, oh no, it won't. But then when you go to church or when I do certain things, right, that support that, it gives me a more comfort and I'm able to step out. And I think that's what we have to figure out, what allows us to step out more encouraged, whether it be a friend, a therapist, a coach, going to church and praying to God or whatever it is. But there's certain things in your life that you use. And I wouldn't call them coping. I really feel like they are the things, they're the tools that you use, right? It's not coping tool. It is a tool that helps me take the next step over. It's like crossing over that big um, pothole, right? That deep sink.
But
that
it's internal. You use
Yes,
it
that's what internal.
internally for your sense of your
Yes.
connection to spirit, right? Is your I remembered when this happened for you, when you said, back in the day when imposter syndrome was really big for you. And again, I mentioned Karen we used to work together, and Karen would come into my office and say, "I'm a fraud. I'm a fraud." And I remember when this transformation happened and you said, I realized, like, I have a personal relationship with God. It's
Mhm.
it's it's in here. And
Yep.
I remember, I remember that day. I'm gonna cry right now. I remember that day like it was yesterday, and the joy. I remember just God, the joy. There's just you had so much joy. You told me you
It's
were
the
outside
relief.
like
Yeah.
dancing like under a tree or something.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
that's when I feel like something. It's really funny. It's when I'm out with nature or something where I just notice that he's there, like how things happen, right? But I do like dancing as a way to get in tune with God. As I go outside, put on music, and I just dance, or I sit out there or something with nature. It just works for me too.
Yeah, I come from a more secular background, and I mentioned, that part of this work is sort of embracing existential courage. So I define or just sort of identify as someone who comes from what's called an existential humanistic background. So
Hmm.
from that background, this is the life we have, and our work is to figure out who we are. Who are we? Because there's only one of you, there's only one of me, there's only one of you, there's only one of all anybody watching this, there's only one of you. And so from where I come, it's like your purpose, everybody's purpose is to figure out who you are as that unique creation, that unique human being. We each, every single person has a gift, whatever it is. It might be that maybe your gift is gardening, and people who walk by see your beautiful garden, and you bring joy to people's lives. Or maybe it's something more private, like maybe you have a gift for writing poetry that you just write for yourself. Like everybody has, you might be like an amazing mechanic, like you're the person that everybody trusts. They take their car to go see you. Like this, everybody has something that's just uniquely you. And the more that we can learn and identify and be more focused on who we are, and then our goal is to bring that out into the world instead of looking outside of ourselves and saying, who am I supposed to be? Which may or may not align with who you are. And then you feel that misfit. And then again, oops, I'm an imposter. So
Yeah,
that,
and and so it's funny because you say that, but I remember when I first, there's that big book that was read about what is my purpose, what is my purpose. I read it, and I read another book on what is my purpose, and I never finished it. I tried my best, but then I realized the key to it. And this is what my coaching business is all about, right? Is I talk a lot about the purpose isn't always like one thing, right? Like I always thought my purpose was to be, I wish I could be a nun because then I could be the purpose I'm meant to be. And I realized I'm not meant to be a nun, right? It's the me that I'm supposed to be, like you just said, that's supposed to, I'm meant for this world to do something, right? And be, and it's nothing more than being who I am. So I had to like let go of the thing of seeking out like the one thing that really wasn't me. It's that's why I think it became so easy because you're gonna discover it once you take the time to discover it. You're more intentional about discovering. That's the gift that made me start to get rid of my imposter syndrome too. Right? It's to believe what you said about we all have our unique gifts. No
yeah.
one else can give the same perspective that I can exactly as I can. They'll never use the same experiences, reasoning. They may, some people will, but it's just interesting for me. The more I note that my perspective is actually a gift to this world, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
go ahead.
There's only one you.
Yeah.
So I think that this journey, trying to put myself in people's shoes right now, and this might sound like, wow, this sounds really narcissistic. Like,
And narcissistic, for everybody who I did not know what that meant until you explained that, means what? Narcissistic.
okay, so the way I just used it there, like, oh, this sound, people use it like to mean the same as people who are just like all about themselves and they're
Okay.
self-absorbed and they're
Second.
selfish and only think about themselves, right? Like as a negative term. But the thing is, what it really comes from, again, it's from the story of Narcissus, about the boy who falls in love with his own reflection. It really is about when it's healthy. And a lot of people don't know there's healthy narcissism. And healthy narcissism just means healthy self-love.
Oh,
So,
I did not even know that. See,
yeah,
I even learned something new from you today. I did not know that. Didn't know there was a healthy. Oh, okay.
yeah, healthy narcissism. Like we all need
It's like
to.
the healthy ego
Yes, just
versus
like a healthy ego. People think, again, egotistical could be, oh, it's selfish. You think so much. And I think that this is one area where maybe women, there's a lot more. And we talked about how part of imposter syndrome can be something that you inherit from the culture, social norms and cultural norms. And one of those, I think, for women is, we're not supposed to be thinking about ourselves. We're supposed to be thinking about everybody else and how everybody else is doing. And,
putting ourselves last.
we're
Yeah.
selfish, like,
If
selfish
we
with in
we'd
a
be
bad way.
selfish if we put
Yeah.
ourselves in front of someone else.
Yeah,
Exactly.
how dare you do that? And
Yeah.
and matter of fact, this social norm is such a big contributing factor to imposter syndrome because it creates it's where you start, right? Oh, no, I've got to like figure out what everybody needs and I gotta make sure I meet all those expectations. Oh, I'm not meeting those expectations. Let me do more and become more and more and more self-neglecting. So
Yep.
what we're talking about, so we're not talking about egocentrism and self-absorption. We're talking about curiosity. We're talking
Mm,
about
yes.
awareness, of just cultivating an ability to just know who you are so that you could be in the world with authentic confidence. And that's going to be in a later video. But the foundation is an openness for self inquiry, to be curious about yourself without judgment, with a lot of compassion, because you have to know who you are. If you're going to overcome imposter syndrome, it has to start with knowing who you are. And this is sort of our last bullet point today, which is as you do this journey and you're trying to be more compassionate and self observing and self aware, you are going to notice mistakes that you make. And this is part of the work, is learning to have a different relationship for people suffering from imposter syndrome. That's like the biggest fear, right? Oh my God, I'm going to make a mistake and they're going to see I'm a fraud and then no one's going to like want me or like me. And Karen, you have like a version of that about what drove you in your career, right? And you're like, oh, what your story to yourself? If I get discovered, then I'm going to lose my job and I'm going to lose my house, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna lose my house, and then I'm gonna bring disgrace to my family because I have to live with them, and da da da, and And I think also what's interesting for me about embracing mistakes, it's like when I thought about that too, because every mistake was highlighted as the big drop shoe, and I'm waiting for the shoe to drop, right? Because someone's gonna find out. I think what's interesting too is I started to have so much regrets of my mistake,
Mm.
and that was what a word I had to let go, where the regrets I had to realize that I want to bring this up because I think it's important about regrets is, you could regret a decision that you made. But then I started to remind my clients and myself, which is a big thing to let me go regret, was the fact that at that moment in time, I did make the best decision I could make
Yes.
because I had all the information there. Would I made a better decision looking back? Of course I would, because there's more information, right? And I knew because I know the outcome was. But at that moment in time, when I started to give myself grace, right?
Mhm.
The grace to learn, to have that experience, the fact that not beating myself up for having made the mistake, but to realize that that was the best. I made a good decision then, best that I could at that time. And maybe I would have made something different. But when I started to like let go of those, that really started to help me as well. So I love what you said about
It's so
mistakes because
cool.
they're not like, failures. I love the word mistakes, guys. When we use so much on failure, it's such a, you know, tough word, right? Because I have so many energy around that word that's negative, but mistakes I can deal with, right? That word.
You haven't shared that story with me before, which is super cool because
I'm
it's
surprised it's in store for you as we do this podcast. So
well, it's just
20 years of a relationship doesn't mean I've shared it all. That's interesting. Okay, keep going.
well, as I say, so you share. I think you shared that you're Chinese American, right?
Yes, I'm
And
Chinese.
I'm half Filipino American. So Karen and I both come from Chinese, Asian culture, and in my family, there we had the same sort of perfectionism, social family expectations, and there was one point when my dad got older and he got wiser. He said the exact same thing to me, and he said, because I would feel so much guilt if I made a mistake, if I made a bad choice. And when my dad got older and wiser, he said exactly the same thing. He said, you made the best decision you could with the information available.
Mhm.
So there's no point in being so people write this down. This is we're the
That's
one
how
of
you
the
look at it.
pearls, like, throughout these episodes, we wanna give you these pearls, but the information at hand, you are making the best decision available to you. Honestly, how many people think like, "Well, I had other information and there was this better decision I could have made, but I did this one," knowing that. Like, no one does that. We make the best decision with the information at hand.
Because our brain is a brilliant machine. It's gonna look at the probabilities and all and the dangers and all that other stuff. And then when I started to think about that, you know, it just like, wow, it is so right. But I never took the time. So I went automatically to say, I stink. I made a horrible decision because it was not right. But what is right? So
Well, and that goes back, so some of the themes we want you to see, expectations.
yes.
So
Ah, that's a killer.
right?
Killer.
When we do that second guessing, "Oh, I shoulda, woulda, coulda,"
Oh,
that's because there's some expectation, one, that you should never make a mistake. You always should make the right decision. That's the expectation there. You're never allowed to make a mistake. You make a mistake, you're gonna be kicked out of the cave. Kicked out of the cave, saber-tooth tiger's gonna eat you. So there's this unrealistic expectation that after the fact, that critic that's there to it just says what it says because it's like, "Oh my god, you're gonna be thrown out of the cave," and it's got data you didn't have. So it's being able to recognize that and have grace for yourself and compassion and say, "Nope, the pearl is I made the best decision I could with the information available.
and
Now,
just let
in
it go.
hindsight, I have new information." Matter of fact, the information is I got to see what the outcome was of the choice. Yeah, if you knew what that outcome was gonna be, you would have made a different choice, but that came after. So
And that's the part of the growth because you talk a lot about mistakes and growth because you will never now make the same decision now? Because it's going to come up, that decision could come up again. But then again, it won't come exactly up as it is because every circumstance, every moment of your day never repeats itself honestly. There's like elements that'll be similar, but there'll be a
Yes.
lot of elements that are separate. And when I realized that as well, I was like, oh my gosh, that's true. Because and your brain will make sure it takes that lessons because I don't have to remember that. My brain already has that codified. So that's what's really cool.
Yeah, I have to always break that to clients, and my therapist had to break that to me, right? Because we think about journey. How many of you out there right now, when we said journey, you're picturing this linear, like a road that just
Oh
goes
my
straight,
gosh. That's
and
what I originally thought too, yeah.
right,
Instead of it
and
going
it's not. It's not. It's just. It's really more of a spiral.
oh,
And so what Karen just said is you're going to
uh,
encounter the same thing again because you come around, but you're a little bit different. The situations
wiser,
that
you're a
you
bit
have to,
wiser. Yep.
yeah.
Different circumstance a little bit.
And each time you're gonna, take a crack at it and it's gonna be slightly different and you're gonna learn. There's gonna you're gonna have successes, but you're also gonna have failures. And I'll be honest with you, we learn more probably from our mistakes when we can approach it with a lot of compassion and not judgment and curiosity to be open to say, God, how did that happen? What was my blind spot?
You take the time,
You know,
right, to
what
like
was there,
notice.
yeah, was
Yeah.
there actually a blind spot that if I can be more aware, I would have been able to anticipate that. Sometimes there's not. Sometimes it's just you make the best decision you can with the information at hand. But you still can look at it and say, okay, I learned this.
Yeah.
I always phrase it with clients, I'm like, it's an experiment. Okay. And when you experiment, you're gathering data. And it doesn't mean you do that experiment once. You do the experiment, you gather data. You do another experiment, you gather data. You do another experiment, you gather data. And when we look at it more that it's an iterative process, it's something we do over and over again, we're able to be more courageous because we're not putting it all on the line, which is how that old brain says, it's all on the line. If you don't show up the way people expect you to, you're going to be seen and if you make a mistake, you're going to be kicked out of the cave. It's not going to happen. Matter of fact, the ability to acknowledge mistakes gives permission to the people around you to also be more human and be more vulnerable and more authentic. And I think maybe you've got people in your life who don't know how to deal with that because they're so deep into their own imposter syndrome. And, it's like there are people who make themselves feel safer by making other people feel small.
Hmm.
You know, as you do this work, you're going to maybe find that there are people in your life that don't serve you, that aren't supporting you, who will keep you stuck. And so, I guess we should have a little warning that if you're going to do this kind of deep work, there's going to, some of it's going to be hard and you're going to have to make some big decisions. You're going to have to be out of your comfort zone. You're going to have to be vulnerable. You have to do a lot of things that are hard.
Yeah, and but it's well worth it in the end. And it's the whole point. It's not all dramatic. It's not all at one time, right? And that's the
Right.
whole point of it being a journey,
Mm.
right? I think that's the beauty of it. And I really like the emphasis of a support person or just to take it as it unfolds. Because you're not gonna be able to take it all at once. Your brain won't let you. Like I've been told with, my Lord, like he'll only take what I can hold on to, only the stuff that I can, process through, right? Because you can, it's almost like going in the dark room. Someone says, so this, I love this digest. If you go into a dark room, it's almost like all of a sudden you go in the dark room and then puts on the lights. And you're like, oh my gosh, I don't do this. I don't do this. You see all the mistakes and you get overwhelmed and you freeze. Like, where am I going to go? And I think what I love about our brain too, it allows us to see different things at the right time with
Yeah.
my brain and the Lord for me. And so I can see at the right time so I can deal with it. So I'm never ever gonna be overloaded. And
Yeah.
I love that perspective that I have. So we're coming to a close,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, I just wanted to summarize what I'm going to invite people to reflect on, which is the first part of what we're calling um, basically avoiding the external validation trap.
Mhm.
And the first step is cultivating this authentic self confidence that is based on engaging in sort of a curiosity and self awareness practice, cultivating courage to really see yourself for who you are, as imperfect as you are, but as a unique human being that you are, connecting and figuring out what is meaningful and your personal meaning is. And we're going to do a little bit more deeper dive on that in our next episode. And then learning to embrace mistakes as a path to growing and shifting from that perfectionism mindset that really keeps the imposter syndrome sort of alive and well, and instead being able to see it as an opportunity to learn and cultivating compassion, empathy, and self acceptance. Like, these are the forces we want you to sort of think about. And if you want to share your own story down in the comments below, we're going to be inviting the community to share with us, like, where are you in the journey? What's your experience of imposter syndrome? What are the areas where you've tried things and you've gotten stuck? Because we want to, be able to start building up things we might put into future episodes. And hopefully at some point we do, if we can build an audience. So we really want you to hit like and share and subscribe, because if we build a big enough audience, we really have a goal of doing this in a live stream so we can take your questions real time. So we really appreciate your being here with us on this first
Thank you,
episode.
thank you, thank you. Yes.
And
And we
Karen,
really,
something you want to say to close out?
I think the thing is, I want you to remember that, as Christina said, most importantly, is the fact that we wanted to share and become a community for you. So again, we really like the word simply human because of the fact that we are. That's what we are. We're simply human. And as Christina and I were just doing it initially, just talking through our things, it was really important that you realize that you're human. Some of it is you're wired. You're wired this way. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Like I was so ashamed. And the whole point of it is I didn't realize until I did this exploration with imposter syndrome. And then even all the other topics that Christina are talking about is those things that really gripped us, boundaries and all these other things that we're so excited to share. So we look forward to the topics you want to share, but just thank you so much for this time that you've given us. And we look forward to engaging with you in the future.
Thank you, everybody. And don't forget, hit the next video. And we're going to do a deep dive on more aspects of dealing with imposter syndrome. So, see you next time.